Joining me right now is the Attorney General of West Virginia, John McCuskey. His office is defending this law. Thanks for being here, Attorney General. I appreciate your time. How does the ban in West Virginia not equal discriminating against a person based on sex?
Because it applies to biological males and biological females, which is which is the test under the Equal Protection Clause.
Attorney General, also one aspect of your case, and definitely was before the lower courts before it got to the Supreme Court, was just the unfair or lack thereof advantage that a transgender athlete would have. Becky Pepper Jackson's mother, I saw in an interview, said she's actually not the biggest person on her team. Her mother says there's people taller than her, there's people shorter than her. She's just an average female teenager. And I saw the appeals court said that West Virginia law could not be enforced against Pepper Jackson, specifically because she had said medication has prevented her from going through male puberty. What do you say to that? How important is this to your case?
Yeah, so the science around puberty blockers is enormously unsettled, and even in that posture of being unsettled, it is still most of the literature falls on our side of this argument, and that is that puberty blockers don't stop puberty in its entirety. And I think more importantly, one of the really interesting aspects of this case is if the ACLU's arguments are to prevail, which we don't think they're going to, you would create a system where every athlete who wanted to play on a team that every male athlete that wanted to play on a female team would have to undergo extensive medical monitoring and testing to determine their level of hormones, their bone density, etc. And that's not a system that any public school system or any state could ever undertake. It's unfair to the athletes. It's unfair on both sides, actually. And the system that the state of West Virginia has set up is fair and it's simple. And what it does is it says you're going to play on the team with the gender that you're assigned at birth. Because what we know and what is an immutable scientific fact is that there are biological differences between the sexes, and that men have the capability of being bigger, faster, and stronger just based on their genetics.
So when you talk about, in that scenario, you're saying every male athlete would have to go through testing, or every male athlete who wanted to. As I've seen reported, this seems to impact one single athlete in West Virginia. I mean, and state action against trans athletes has long faced criticism of being more about a national political climate that's focused on a select few, that you're creating a solution in search of a problem. How do you answer to that?
Yeah, I think that really obfuscates, that really doesn't give any credence to the opinions of the thousands of other girls that are playing sports in West Virginia. And to be fair, we don't know how many trans athletes are competing in West Virginia. It is impossible to know. What we know is that after West Virginia passed the Save Women's Sports Act, that we were sued by the ACLU within hours. And so this case is in front of the Supreme Court, not because we created the litigation, but because our state and the legislature was sued by the ACLU.
More than 20 other states have enacted similar restrictions since 2020. Do you hope that this case, the state's law, the eventual decision, if it goes in your favor by the Supreme Court, do you want it to serve as a model for other states to follow?
So, you bring up a really great point here. And what we're really talking about is, do states have the ability to regulate athletics in this way? And the answer, in our opinion, is clearly yes. And what a positive decision in this case will do will be to give the 26 other states who've passed these laws the confidence to enforce them. And so will this create a nationwide wave of these kind of laws? I don't know. It feels like most of the states who want to pass these laws already have. But what it will do is it will show a model of how to pass the legislation, what the language should be, and what we know is constitutional. And that's what the Supreme Court's going to be deciding today.
One aspect that is part of this case is a question of Title IX. And there's big concern about how the justices would decide, what impact, depending on how broad or narrow they would decide it could have on Title IX. If this case, your law, and the eventual Supreme Court decision would lead to I don't know, the crumbling or crippling of Title IX, which has been in place since, what, 1970-ish. If it crippled that very important law, would you see that as a victory?
No. So we're arguing in favor of Title IX. So Title IX was created to ensure that women and girls had access to athletic and academic opportunities. And this is the 50-year anniversary of Title IX. And what's really amazing is when you look through our brief, the statistics that we cite about how many women who are CEOs in American corporations or in very high levels in American government, how many of them participated in competitive female athletics, either at the college or the high school level. And so what we've seen is that Title IX has created an environment where women have the opportunity to experience all the amazing things that competitive sports do to create leadership skills and to understand how to be a teammate and to show up for others and how to understand failure and how to understand success and how to really be the kind of person that this country needs to be leading us. And so our argument is that the state law actually supports the underlying principles of Title IX, and if we lose, Title IX will be eroded to the point where it is basically meaningless.
And it will now be up to the Supreme Court justices to decide all of the qualities that you just described of what are the benefits that female athletes gain from sports, if that will be or is in some way hindered by a transgender athlete taking part in it. Thank you so much for coming in, Attorney General. A very important day. Appreciate your time. Sarah.